Oh my treasures, it's time for Festivals of Legends to get some more cards revealed, so let's go over the remaining neutral cards. The first card that got revealed is Frequency Oscillator, which is a 1-cost 2 attack 1 HP a mech neutral minion with Battlecry. The next mech you play costs 1 less. So we do have quite a few classes that actually do have mech synergy, and we probably will be seeing quite a bit more that we'll see mech synergy in this set, because there are clearly some forms of music that have a lot of technological influences. However, instruments themselves could be seen as a form of technology, and I can't see Blizzard not taking the chance of making a bunch of puns with a bunch of mech theme instruments. This card reminds me a lot of the 1 attack 2 HP 1 cost elemental that does the exact same thing for elementals. However, I do think there's a lot more possibilities for this card to be easily abused. This one clearly fits better in mech decks than the other one did in elemental decks, mainly due to the fact that elemental decks don't really run too many cheap elementals, but mech decks are usually aggro-based decks, and thus this would make this card incredibly powerful, as you could cheat out another 1-cost minion on turn 1, or you could use it to play a 3-cost minion on turn 2. There's a lot of possibilities for this card, and generally speaking, I don't see a world where this one doesn't see any type of play. And now for the next card revealed, which is Metronome, which is a 3-cost 2 attack 4 HP neutral mech. After you play a 1-cost card, draw a 2-cost card, then increase. Boy oh boy, am I glad that the quest lines are rotating out, because this in combination with the priest one would make it incredibly consistent, which may or may not be a problem in Wild. We'll see how that ends up working out. That deck might be still a little bit too slow for Wild to even ever see any type of play. However, I do think this card is really good because it does allow you to curve pretty easily. If you have any ways to actually buff this up to make it even harder to kill, you can make a lot of advantage out of this really easily, because if you can put this down on turn 3, it survives till turn 4, then you put down a 1-cost, then 2-cost. You're replacing each card that you put down with another card in your hand, which gives you a really good advantage tool. And if you can actually make this continuously ramp as the game goes on, if you make it survive for more than 1 turn, then you're just going to be able to flood the board with a bunch of minions that are always going to be perfectly on curve. Sure, once you get to 10 costs, you're not going to be able to go any higher outside of something like Null, but Null is rotating out. It is still a really decent card, and honestly, I can't see a world where this doesn't see play, especially because you can even cheat this out on turn 2 with the previous card that we just went over. And now for the next card, which is going to be Audio Amplifier, which is a 2-cost 2 attack 3 HP mech Battlecry. Set your maximum mana and hand size to 11. This is one of those cards that we knew Blizzard was probably going to make some type of pun of turning things up to 11. And behold, this is your Death Beetle trigger that you would need after Guff actually rotates out for Druid. However, I don't know how useful this card is going to be in the long run, even in a Druid deck, because in most decks, once you place the initial copy down, it's only going to be a 2-cost 2 attack 3 HP minion where you're not going to have any synergy. However, if you can randomly generate this in a mech deck, it could be useful there. I don't know if those decks will actually want to run a card like this, because a lot of them do have an aggro playstyle, and they're never going to actually fill their hand completely up. So Radar Scan in Paladin does allow this card to be incredibly good, because you are going to be drawing into a lot of cards using that. And because we are seeing a lot of mechs here, we're probably going to end up having a critical mass of cards where you can just run a pure mech Paladin deck once again, which I know is something that people have tried out in the past, and I think it is a pretty decent deck right now. Though pure Paladin is probably the better way to go if you want to go down a menagerie route. Now for the next card revealed, which is going to be Stereo Totem, a 2-cost 0 attack 3 HP totem. At the end of your turn, give a random minion in your hand +2/+2. So why isn't this a mech? If we're going to take the logic of anything that has any mechanical bits to it, becoming a mech that isn't arcane based, this would probably fit under that category. I'm assuming the reason why they didn't end up doing it is it would be very problematic for a mech aggro deck to use a card like this to buff up their mechs in hand in order to get a very wide board for very, very cheap. This way, outside of Shaman, you probably won't see any additional support, so there's less decks that you actually have to worry about. However, the Stone Right was a pretty decent card. It just needed 1 or 2 really good additional totems to make it a decent enough deck. I don't know if we are going to be seeing any additional totem synergy within Shaman, since we only have 1 card revealed so far, and it wasn't a totem related card. However, I could maybe see them try to push a Totem Shaman deck once again, because we did have a lot of support in Castle Nathria, and please, it's a mechanic that is exclusive to neutral or Shaman. Just make the deck work. When was the last time that Totem Shaman actually worked in Standard? I know it might be pretty decent in Wild, but every time they print cards for Totem Shaman in Standard, it just never does anything because it's always missing 1 or 2 cards. And while generally I'm not a big fan of aggro decks, I do really like the idea of Totem based Shaman. Now for the next card revealed, it is going to be Merch Seller, which is a 4 cost 3 attack 5 HP Naga. At the end of your turn, put a random spell on the top of your opponent's deck. So if you're in a top decking war with your opponent, you could actually in theory use this as a way to prevent your opponent from drawing into any of their key combo cards, which could be incredibly funny to actually do. However, it does have a huge likelihood of actually backfiring depending on what card you randomly generate for them. And because of that, I do think it costs maybe a little bit too much. However, with that being said, it at 3 mana could be very devastating, and every single aggro deck would actually want to run it, which is probably why they ended up making a 4 cost card instead of a 3 cost card. So if it's going to be ran in any type of deck, it's probably going to be in a control style of deck where you're trying to prevent your opponent from drawing into key combo cards. Outside of that, I don't see much use for this card, and it really is just a pack filler card. Now for the next card, which is Outfit Tailor, which is a 3 cost to attack 2 HP neutral minion with the battle cry. Give a friendly minion attack and health equal to this. So this card is really good for aggro decks. I don't know where else it fits. The nice thing is we're going to be losing Mr. Smite, so there's no longer a neutral charge for this card to actually buff up in Standard. However, I do think Warriors still will have access to some charge minions once the rotation actually happens. And with the combination of this card plus some of the Enraged Warrior support, I do think this card will find a home in that deck in particular. If you can buff this up while it's in your hand, then it becomes incredibly powerful because you're going to be getting double of any stat buffs you do give it in your hand. And Enraged Warrior has plenty of ways to buff up their hand, then use that buffs to actually abuse some of the charge minions as mentioned before. What I'm getting at is this is probably going to see a lot of play in some type of aggro deck. Now for the next card revealed, which is going to be Static Waveform, a 3 cost 5 attack 6 HP elemental. At the start of each turn, lose 1 attack or health, choose randomly. So this looks incredibly powerful with the stats, especially if you have ways to actually silence it. We do still have Silence Priest support in Standard Hearthstone, so you could use it in that style of deck. We are going to be losing a lot of the Shadow Priest support within the new rotation unless Archbishop Benedictus actually stays in the core set, which would be cool in my opinion, but I don't know if it will end up. So who knows, maybe Silence Priest will actually replace Shadow Priest as the aggro-based priest deck. And this card doesn't really have that big of a downside, which makes it incredibly playable if you do have a way to actually silence it compared to some of the other silence targets we've had in the past. You could also use this in any type of deck that has a lot of elemental synergy, if we are going to see a class that gets a lot of elemental synergy within this set. Either way, I do think this is probably incredibly playable. Don't think it losing 1 attack or HP at the start of each turn is going to be enough to make this card unplayable. Now for the next card reveal, which is Amplified Elk, which is a 10 cost 6 attack 12 HP beast taunt. Death Rattle, deal 3 damage to all enemy minions. Out of all the cards revealed so far, I think this one is probably the most pack filler. We are going to be losing Vander in the new rotation, which means high cost minions like this aren't going to be as playable as they would before, and this card doesn't really do too much for you to want to play a card like this. The other thing worth mentioning is we do have a very similar card right now in Priest that only costs 6 instead of 10, that does 3 damage to all enemy minions and can actually be buffed up to do even more damage, and this card is just basically a worse version of that while it is a neutral. There's not much else to say about the card. I don't see a world where this is playable unless we do get a lot of mana cheat, and I really hope we don't see a lot in this initial set. Now for the next card revealed, which is Pyrotechnician, which is a 4-cost 2-attack 5 HP neutral minion. After you cast a spell, add a random fire spell to your hand. So the pool of fire spells is actually incredibly small, and a lot of the cards are going to be rotating out with the new rotation, which means a card like this could in theory be incredibly consistent. However, we are going to probably see a lot of fire spells in the set if they are printing a neutral card like this, which would make a card like this incredibly inconsistent. And a lot of the spells that fit under the fire tag don't actually have synergy with each other outside of their original class, thus making this card probably not as playable as I would hope. If it was maybe 1 mana lower, it could be a lot more playable. You would have to lower the stat lines by maybe 1/1, and then you would have a pretty decent 3-cost minion, but it being 4 is just a little bit too much in my opinion. Now for the next card, which is going to be Worgen Roadie, a 3-cost 3-attack 4 HP Battlecry. Summon a 0/3 instrument case, or your opponent break it for a random weapon. So we are going to be getting a lot of new weapons in the set, which in theory could actually hurt the playability of this card, because a lot of those cards are going to require mechanics that only that one class has access to. However, this is a 3-cost minion that has no downside for you, which is actually pretty decent as long as your opponent doesn't have a way to buff it up. Thus making this card really dependent on what the other weapons that we will be seeing in the set are, and if there are a bunch of AoE buffs that your opponent can actually do. Alright, now for the next card, which is going to be Festival Security, which is a 3-cost 2-attack 5 HP taunt. Finale, force all enemy minions to attack this. So an easy way to board clear. It has a neutral minion. If you have ways to buff this up, it'll be even better. It reminds me a lot of the Totalan Defender, I think was the card, because it is a Totalan and it is a big taunt for the same amount of mana and has a big upside. I always love cards like this that allow classes that don't normally have an AoE board clear to have a way to clear out your opponent's board if the minions are small enough, because it will allow those decks to also run some more control style decks instead of their stereotypical combo or aggro decks. Alright, the next card revealed today is Air Guitarist, which is a 1-cost 1-attack 1 HP minion. With Battlecry, give your weapon +1 durability. You do know that the new weapons are all going to have a death rattle, which means a card that gives you extra durability isn't actually going to be that useful in the long run. Sure, you could in theory use it with some of the other weapons that currently do exist in Standard, and this might be a decent card for maybe a Weapon Hunter deck, or some other deck can easily abuse some of the weapon support. Now for the next card revealed, which is a much better weapon support, Instrument Technician, which is a 2-cost 1-attack 2 HP minion that has the Battlecry draw a weapon. So here's your consistency factor for any weapon-based deck. I was shocked in Stormwind when we didn't actually get something similar to this, but because we are getting it for this set, this should make the weapons that are instruments a lot easier to actually play compared to the profession weapons that we had in Stormwind, which is kind of depressing to say because a lot of those ones had a real fun design, but from the ones that we have seen so far for this new Festival of Legends, they should be really fun too. If you really do need a weapon to get your synergy online, this is the perfect card for you and has a lot of potential in the nearby future. Now for the next card, which is Audio Medic, a 2-cost 2-attack 3 HP rush minion with Finale gain lifesteal. Just a really nice aggro tool. It has a decent enough stat weight, and if you play on turn 2, you're going to get both rush and lifesteal, so you can actually heal up if your opponent had a bunch of cheap minions. It just feels like one of those cards that is technically useful, just a little bit boring. Now for the next card, which is Candle Eraser, which is a reference to the candles or the light sticks that people have at concerts. It's a 4-cost 3-attack 3 HP minion, Divine Shield. Finale, give adjacent minions Divine Shield. Very similar to the classic card of Silvermoon Guardian, I think it is called, or Guard. But unlike that card, we actually give the other minions next to it Divine Shield, which will make it a perfect aggro tool for a lot of decks to actually use. Sure, Paladin is going to be losing a lot of its Divine Shield synergy with this new set. However, if the legendary spell is any indication, we may or may not see some more Divine Shield synergy within this set. to easily abuse a card like this. And we don't even know what the core set is going to be looking like, but either way, I do think this is going to be a pretty decent card, and while it is neutral, it'll probably fit mostly in a aggro Paladin deck. Now for the next card, which is going to be Cover Artist, a 4-cost, 3 attack, 3 HP minion with the battle cry transform into a 3/3 copy of a minion. So depending on what cards that you're actually going to want to copy, this could in theory be a better faceless manipulator. And because we're not really seeing any spell damage in any of these neutral cards within the set, you could still use it as a way to get another spell damaging minion if you do have a lot of mana cheat and are able to place this down plus a bunch of other cards, thus allowing you to OTK your opponent. That is probably the only home that I can see a card like this actually fitting, because if you try to use it in combination with a powerful Death Rattle, this card costs a little bit too much in my opinion to see much play there. Now for the next card, which is going to be Cowbell Soulless. It's cool that we're seeing a neutral Soulless minion. This is going to be a 3-cost, 4 attack, 2 HP minion with the battle cry. If you control no other minions, deal 2 damage. Kind of boring for a soloist. However, it is a neutral card, which is probably why they went like this. It does have a pretty decent stat line on itself. However, you're probably not going to want to play it just because of the fact that the decks that this would mostly fit in are going to be aggro decks, and those style of decks love to swarm the board, thus you're never going to get this battle cry off. Now for the next card, which is going to be Crowd Surfer, a 1-cost, 1 attack, 1 HP Murloc, a Death Rattle. Give any other minion +1/+1 and this Death Rattle. So this should be able to actually give your opponent the Death Rattle if you really are unfortunate enough for it to actually do that. We do have a bunch of Death Rattle synergy in Shaman, which will be replacing a lot of the Battle Cry synergy that we had in Shaman. I do think this is another one for a deck that is going to run a bunch of Death Rattle synergy, because that deck was already 1 or 2 really good Death Rattles away from being actually very meta relevant. I do know early on in March of the Lich King, when people were testing that deck out, it was more of a menagerie deck. However, because this card is a Murloc, I do think this might push that deck in a more Murloc direction. Now for the next card, which is going to be Annoying Fan, a 1-cost, 1 attack, 2 HP deck with battle cry. Choose a minion. It cannot attack while this is alive. So we'll be seeing another card or two that have a very similar effect to this later on, but this first one is going to be interesting, mainly because it makes me wondering if Annoytron is actually going to be in the core rotation anymore, because he is reappearing right here, right now, as another neutral minion. I don't think this is as strong as Annoytron. However, if your opponent is using a deck where they're just buffing up one minion, then this could easily survive quite a few turns, and thus allowing you to actually win out the game there. Besides that, though, I don't think this is that strong and probably won't see too much play. Now for the next card, which is going to be Freebird, a 4-cost, 2 attack, 2 HP beast with charge, battle cry, gain +1/+1 for each other free bird you've played this game. So this is just Pogo Hopper, but better. This has charge on it, which is really frustrating because this could snowball incredibly quickly. The only plus side for this card in particular is the fact that Northshire Farmer is actually rotating out. Thus, you're no longer going to be able to get a lot of additional copies. This also does make me wonder if Dire Frenzy is probably going to be a card that will stick around, because Dire Frenzy does enable this card quite a bit. While this is a neutral card, I don't think this is going to be really a neutral card. It's a card that will fit in either 1 or 2 classes, such as Druid and Hunter, and any other class that tries to easily abuse this won't have the tools to get additional copies, and thus making this a lot worse. And boy oh boy, am I glad that Bran is not going to be sticking around for this rotation, because there is a bunch of really powerful battle cries I would never want to see in combination with him. Alright, now for the next card, which is going to be Mishmash Mosher, a 8-cost, 3 attack, 10 HP undead minion with rush. After this attacks, gain +1 attack and attack a random enemy minion. I think this card costs a little bit too much to see a lot of play. It reminds me of the card back in Rossicon's Rumble, I think, that allowed you to attack each individual minion that your opponent actually plays. Though actually in practice, it probably works very similar because it should just be able to chain until all of your opponent's minions are dead. But again, it costs 8, which makes it a little bit less playable than I would hope for, unless we have a lot of mana cheat, though Vander is going to be rotating out, which is probably why they didn't print this card in the previous set, even though it is a undead minion. It has a lot of potential to be really good, but it also has a lot of potential of just being a dead card. Now for the next card, which is Obsessed Fan, very similar to the Annoying Fan that we saw earlier. This is a 4 cost to attack 6 HP minion with the battle cry, choose a minion. It has stealth while this is alive. So if you use this in combination with Red Herring, you can give your entire board stealth permanently, which is incredibly funny. Though you are going to need some type of way to get 1 additional mana to be able to play both of those cards on the same turn. And because we do have Mailbox Dancer actually rotating out, I do think the one class that would be most easily able to abuse this combo is probably going to end up being Rogue. Stealth minions are incredibly annoying for you to actually deal with, and it's the reason why they have really moved away from printing a lot of stealth minion support. It also has the added benefit of allowing you to protect any minion that has a really powerful onboard effect outside of Red Herring, so it could see some play that way too. Now for the next card, which is going to be Paparazzi, a 3 cost 3 attack 4 HP minion that has the battle cry, discover a legendary minion. So this is just a pack filler card. However, if it does prioritize class cards, then this card could be incredibly good for a deck that relies on 1 class legendary. But for the most part, I'm going to assume this card probably doesn't. And I guess the one upside about this card in particular is the fact that it is discover a legendary minion instead of randomly generating it, thus allowing you to have actually a choice. Alright, now for the next card, which is going to be Party Animal, a 2 cost to attack 3 HP beast minion with Battlecry. Give +1/+1 to a minion of each type in your hand. So another neutral card for a neutral menagerie deck. This is actually pretty powerful. It is only a 2 cost minion. You have to also remember we do have 5 amalgams now in Standard Rotation, where this card could easily be abused with, as it will hit all 5 of them, which is actually quite impressive. If you're using this in any deck that does rely on beast synergy or relies on just a menagerie of different minions, then this card is going to be incredibly powerful. And honestly speaking, I think a menagerie neutral deck is really shaping up to be a pretty decent deck with a lot of these new support cards. Now for the next card, which is going to be Rolling Stone, a 2 cost to attack 2 HP. Elemental, Rush, Battlecry. If your last card you've played costs 1, gain +1/+1. So really good aggro tool, really good elemental synergy for whatever elemental synergy that we'll see in one of the given classes. I would assume that is probably going to be either Mage or Shaman, depending on how Blizzard actually wants to go around. This card is definitely going to get the ball rolling for that style of deck, and I don't see a world where this doesn't see that much play. This card, in combination with the previous card, actually makes it a lot better because you do have another really good menagerie target that is going to be neutral. And really, you're just going to have to choose whatever class that you want to use the most. That has a lot of really good AoE buffs. And honestly, I think Aggro Druid is probably the class that you're going to be wanting to do this stuff in. Now for the next card, which is going to be Rowdy Fan, a 3 cost minion, 1 attack, 5 HP, Quillborg, Battlecry. Choose a minion. It has +4 attack while this is alive. So if you have something in combination with Charge, this could be incredibly funny. If you just need to finish off your opponent on a given turn, then that could also work, as this is just going to be +4 attack. Honestly, this is a 5/5 for 3, which isn't actually that bad. There is a 5/5 for 2 that has a huge downside, and that card already sees play. We don't have that many Quillborgs in Standard Rotation, so a card like this could be played in the Menagerie deck that I have been mentioning before, even though you don't have the draw power of the Curator in order to get your hand refilled whenever you do play these cards down. That is the only downside, because a lot of these cards are going to be really good for those styles of deck, but Pure Paladin doesn't want you to run any neutral cards, and all of these cards are neutral, so we'll have to see what the Paladin support is, or if there are going to be some class that has a lot of draw power that draws random minions out of the deck. Now for the next card, which is going to be Unpopular Has Been, a 6 cost 5 attack 5 HP undead minion. Death Rattle, summon a random 5-cost minion from the past. I don't think there's any 5-cost minion that I can think of off the top of my head that is going to be absolutely broken if you do randomly generate it. I could be completely wrong. Hearthstone has been out for 9 years, so there is probably at least 1 or 2 5-cost minions that this could be really annoying to actually have randomly generate, especially if you have a way to bounce back to your hand and it has a powerful battle cry on it. I do think this is, again, another one of those pack filler cards that is kind of cool to actually see, but I don't think it's going to see much play in a competitive stance, though you might randomly generate this off of the Scourge and then might get something really fun there. Now for the next card, which is going to be a huge shock to me, a Tradeable minion, which is a 8-cost, 8 attack, 8 HP dragon, concert promotional Drake. Tradeable, finale, destroy an enemy minion. I am so shocked that we're getting a new Tradeable card once Tradeable has actually rotated out. So this probably means Tradeable is going to end up becoming a Evergreen keyword, which is great. Out of all the keywords that are going to be rotating out with the new rotation, that is the keyword that felt the most fluid when it came to being a permanent addition to Standard Hearthstone, which is great in my opinion. This was something that me and a lot of other people wanted to see stick around. Sure, this is going to be an 8-cost minion with 8 attack, 8 HP, which might not make it the easiest thing to actually use in practice. However, it does show precedence for Tradeable maintaining its presence in Standard, and that's all that really matters. And now for the legendaries. First one is going to be Photographer Fizzle, a 3-cost, 3 attack, 3 HP minion. Battlecry, take a snapshot of your current hand and shuffle it into your deck. Deadman hand for everyone! Isn't that great? This is one of those cards that I'm really happy to see because it does allow you to have a lot of really wacky and fun combos. It is also worth mentioning that this card only shuffles 1 card in your deck, which is a 2-cost spell that gives you all the other cards that you had in your hand when you do play this down. There's not going to be that many easy ways to actually get an infinite loop with this, which sucks a little bit. However, I do think there is a lot of potential for a card like this to be broken. It just really needs 1 or 2 really good support cards. It does make me worry if Shadow Step is going to stay in Standard, because this card, if you Shadow Step it back to your hand after you play it, you could just in theory get infinite Shadow Steps, thus allowing you to go infinite within a rogue style of deck, and I don't know if Blizzard wants to support that style of deck. I think this has a lot of potential to be a lot of fun. We just need to see if we have easy ways to make additional copies, or you could maybe combo this out with a Jailer so you can go infinite there too. Now for the next card revealed, which is going to be Ozik, Audio Engineer, which is a 4-cost, 5 attack, 4 HP minion with a battle cry. Add 2 3/3 bots to your opponent's hand, death rattle, summon them for yourself. So if your opponent does anything that isn't just place down the 3/3 bots, then this card will always drag them out no matter where their location actually is. But if they do summon the 3/3 bots down, then they will not switch to your control, at least according to a Blizzard dev, which makes a card like this, I think, almost unplayable. Sure, it's only 4 mana, and it's a 5/4, but there are plenty of other really good 4-cost minions that you could use instead of a card like this that doesn't in theory give your opponent some type of advantage. The only place I could see this maybe seeing some play is some type of mill deck where you're trying to prevent your opponent from drawing into any of their cards, and you're using this as a way to burn their cards instead of just giving them some type of advantage, but that only works for 1 turn, so you're only going to really burn 1 card unless you use this in combination with Due Process, where you could burn your opponent for quite a few more cards. I don't know how playable this should be. There should be something at least memeable with the card, which means it might be fun to play around with, but if we're going to talk about memes, we should talk about the last card. This is going to be Tony, King of Piracy, a 5-cost, 4 attack, 6 HP pirate minion. Both players' decks are swapped. Finale, draw a card. So, while this card is a complete meme, there are some combos that you can do with this card that are going to be very devastating. In particular, if you use this in combination with Fires of Zin Ajari plus Steam Cleaner, you can just wipe out your opponent's deck completely and then swap it back if you destroy this minion. There are even the more wackier combos with something like Red Herring in combination with this to give it permanent stealth, thus making it incredibly hard for your opponent to deal with. You could also use this in combination with the Jailer in order to burn your deck and then destroy it using some type of non-targeting spell. There's a lot of possibilities you could use with a card like this, and it's going to be incredibly fun to actually play around with. However, once it becomes meta relevant, this card is going to be incredibly annoying to deal with, and we'll probably end up seeing a nerf if that ever does happen. It to become meta warping, however, it being a neutral card always makes me worry about any potential future support that Blizzard doesn't really think too hard about. Because we have seen in the past when something like that does accidentally happen, it is never a fun time for anyone involved. Though either way, it does not stop me from wanting to theorycraft a deck to mainly abuse this card. So those were all the cards revealed in the past 2 days. Let me know what cards you're most looking forward to using. Tony is probably the card that I want to use the most because it is the funniest card out of the entire bunch. And like always, if you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, subscribe. Until next time, bye bye.